2 days before the 33rd anniversary of one of the most phenomenal assassinations of the 20th century, that the assassination of the young president, John F. Kennedy. Now, we may or may not have fond memories or have anything or even care about John F. Kennedy, but what is key and significant is that his assassination really was a turning point. And I am convinced, based upon my own research, consists mainly of reading the published information about this, I'm convinced that America entered a rapid descension from superpower status. And I'm not just talking about military superpower, I'm talking about the best hospitals or medical care in the world, or best high-tech medical care, access to medical care, I should say, or the best school system that was set up in the world, and all of these things, America, the wealthiest nation, to where we find ourselves today with an abysmal healthcare system, an abysmal education system, an abysmal economic system, an abysmal political system. And I'm thoroughly convinced that it was at that point, and with that assassination, that rapid decline began. We're going to talk today about another assassination. And today we're going to deal with the assassination of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, a phenomenal individual, I think in many ways a much misunderstood individual, and a man who was evolving to a point that I think to date we who would consider ourselves African-centered and Pan-Africanists and black nationalists, we would be proud to see the evolution of Dr. King to have continued in the direction that it was going. And I'm hoping during the course of today's presentation, we will get an overstanding of some of the things that led to his assassination. And specifically, what we're going to do is we're going to use a newly published book. We did talk about this book last week in the first of this four-part series. Last week, we dealt with an overview of the murder of Dr. Martin Luther King. We brought out a series of books, which I'm going to introduce here also. But the newest book is written by an attorney by the name of William Pepper. And William Pepper is the attorney for James Earl Ray. His new book, published in 1995, is called it's called Orders to Kill: The Truth Behind the Murder of Martin Luther King. And I personally am phenomenally impressed with this book. I bought the book on a Friday, and by Friday the following week I had finished the book, and it is absolutely one of my favorite books in my library, along with a number of others. Before we get into that book, I'm just going to give you kind of a little bibliography for those that are interested in this kind of research. I highly recommend, and last week what we spoke about as we overviewed these books was Operation COINTELPRO, which was the FBI's counterintelligence program. Specifically, we as African people focus on COINTELPRO black nationalist hate groups. And we also, last week, we focused on two other official government programs. One is called Operation Garden Plot. We talked about Operation Garden Plot. Every time that black people rioted during the 60s and the 70s, the 80s and the 90s, and as late as 1992, when black people in America are engaged in a riot, Operation Garden Plot goes automatically into effect, and it is a military joint Chiefs of Staff operation, Operation Garden Plot. And then we have Operation Sink Strike, Commander-in-Chief Strike Force, which was a combined military program to combat what they deemed as the rise of black nationalist terrorist groups. So the three programs, COINTELPRO, Operation Garden Plot, and Operation Sink Strike, are all overlapping. And of course, there are a number of other official government programs that do include the suppression of our natural ambitions and our natural and national aspirations, but such as MK Ultra, we could go through a bunch of these, Operation MK Chaos or Operation Chaos, etc. So we talked about an overview of that last week. Some of the books we added in our bibliography, one of my absolute favorites, and I hope everyone in the room has read this book, The Judas Factor by Carl Evans, subtitled The Plot to Kill Malcolm X. And this book not only details the Judases inside the Nation of Islam who allowed the FBI access to their most intimate information, but also served as internal provocateurs and agents of manipulation which delivered the assassination of Malcolm X. But this book also does an extremely very thorough job of documenting CIA assassination plots against some very significant African leaders around the globe. Again, one of our key and critical reading lists, The Judas Factor. We also talked about this book by Ward Churchill and Jim Vanderwall, the COINTELPRO Papers. And the COINTELPRO Papers were a series of documents that were discovered in a burglary on an FBI office in a small town in Pennsylvania. What was the name of that town in Pennsylvania? I can't remember the name of the town in Pennsylvania, but they burglarized the FBI office and they stole these papers, the counterintelligence program papers, and the revelations in those papers of the FBI's official suppression of, first, the Communist Party USA, the suppression of black nationalist hate groups as they were deemed, which was really the aspirations of black people for equal rights and justice and all of those things, the suppression of the American independent movement, and they also detailed the FBI's, I dare not say suppression, but their counterintelligence against the Ku Klux Klan, because we're going to show in our series here that they deliberately did not suppress the Ku Klux Klan, and to this date the Ku Klux Klan is still operative, and in many ways, and I hope we're going to get into this today, the Ku Klux Klan is functioning as a extra-legal arm of intelligence organizations inside this country, which ultimately are controlled by the National Security Council. We have also in our library on the subject Malcolm X, the FBI file by Claiborne Carson, another phenomenal book. This details the FBI's following of Malcolm X, Elijah Muhammad, and the Nation of Islam, which they deemed as a hate cult. They called them the cult of the Nation of Islam. Another phenomenal book, man, we really love. We also talked about this book, Racial Matters, the FBI's secret file on Black America from 1960 to 1972, again, mainly dealing with COINTELPRO and Gay Edgar Hoover's pathological hatred of African people, and this one by Kenneth Riley. Another couple of books we brought into the subject last week, The Man Who Cried I Am. Now, again, these are historical works that I have here. The Man Who Cried I Am is a novel, which again, a novel is a fictional work. I think this book very significant because this book by a very noted and very qualified African author, John A. Williams, this book is the first time we ever saw printed what has now become known as the King Alfred Plan. And the King Alfred Plan appears to be very legitimate, and we have weighed the King Alfred Plan against other plans, specifically Rex 84, which was in Oliver North's portfolio when he was in the basement of the White House on the National Security Council, and did come up in the Iran-Contra hearings as a plan to suppress the American people, to throw as many as 21 million black people into prisons. And that plan, when detailed, the Rex 84 plan, so closely resembled the King Alfred Plan, which was reprinted in this book by John A. Williams in 1967, that we cannot help but make the conclusion that what John A. Williams put in his book was in actuality real. And if anyone's familiar with John A. Williams' writings, all of his books, all of his novels appear to be based on true historical fact and true historical trends and processes, but he changes the name. And I highly recommend John A. Williams. Go into the library. I'm not a big reader of fiction or novels, but this probably, he and Zora Neale Hurston are my absolute favorite novelists on the planet. Another book we brought in, Excessive Force, Power, Politics, and Population Control. This deals not so much with the COINTELPRO Sink, Strike, and Garden plot, but this one also deals with what are official U.S. policies for the suppression of people. And in effect, these policies as detailed in this one, which deal with population control, are officially sanctioned USA eugenics programs or genocide programs. And this is going on all around the world. Right now, Nigeria is getting a lot of press where we can show you the documentation exists that Nigeria had been specifically targeted for population reduction by a document called National Security Memorandum 200, which is submitted to Gerald Ford for signature, originally commissioned by Richard Nixon, and it was constructed under the direction of Henry Kissinger. Very significant, and this book, I also distribute this book here on the West Coast. And another book I want to add into the bibliography this week is called War at Home: Covert Action Against U.S. Activists and What We Can Do About It. And I think this is a very good, it's not a very large book, but this is mainly a manual for organizations and activists, those who would find themselves targeted by organizations such as the FBI or the CIA or military intelligence group, etc., and how you can come up with strategies for, one, identifying those people within your midst who are sent there by the government to spy and or be provocateurs, and secondly, how you can do some rather simple processes to say, well, even if they are in and amongst us, they will not disrupt the process and the activism of what we're committed to, because our agenda is written into a set of behaviors that we will not deviate from. And I think that's very key and critical. Just don't deviate once you come up with a good, strong program. There's a set of papers right here on the corner, the right lower corner. If you can pass some of those out to everybody. This is a document that is from the director of the FBI. No, this is to the director of the FBI from Special Agent in Charge of San Francisco. This dated April 2, 1968, which just happened to be 2 days before the assassination of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And this is talking about a counterintelligence program, black nationalist hate groups, racial intelligence. And this was a surveillance of black nationalists and Pan-African groups in San Francisco Bay Area. And this is just an example of the volumes, of the reams and reams of documents that have been secured under the Freedom of Information search, or in the case of the COINTELPRO papers, actually stolen back from those people who constructed this information against us.
Along this line, can you look at the Glass House tape?
The Glass House tapes, very significant. Unfortunately, that book is extremely difficult to find now. I've seen copies of it, but I've not been able to secure mine.
The city police bought out 50,000 copies of the Glass House tapes the month it came out. That's why it's hard to find.
And the Glass House tapes were written by a black man by the name of, I can't remember his name. He was a agent provocateur working for Daryl Gates and the intelligence units inside the LAPD, and he also details how the LAPD was intimately working with the Central Intelligence Agency, the FBI, and other agencies, and how they were doing provocateur actions which resulted in some notorious things, such as the murder of George Jackson, Jonathan Jackson, the murder of the Symbionese Liberation Army people in South Central when they had the massive shootout and burned them all to death in the building. The Panthers shootout, etc. And how he worked as a provocateur in Parker Center, which was called the Glass House. And also, correct.
I believe I was watching the show on Marilyn Monroe. He was one of the officers who either found her body was the one who went in there with a couple of other officers to bring her out when they found her dead.
Very interesting. Well, Chief Gates is a very interesting character. He also headed up what was called a SID, what was it called? The criminal.
Terrorists, they got some.
And well, he started the SWAT, the whole SWAT thing, but there was a secret. There was the PDID, Public Disturbance Intelligence Department. You have the SIS, Special Investigations Service, which were in effect functioning as a hitman squad in the LAPD. And then you had the other ones that recently got busted spying on OCID, Organized Crime Intelligence Division. They were the ones who were indicted in Mike Rothmiller's book, Inside the LAPD's Secret Police.
Is that the one where they was spying on Magic Johnson and stuff?
They spied on all the celebrities, including their new chief, Willie Williams, who to this date denies that they're a danger, but they followed him and spied on him also.
Gates was, had his talk show on KFI, what's his name, Metzger from the White Air Resistance called in, was messing with him, right? And he was saying something where the LAPD they said a spy within the neo-Nazi party was supposed to assassinate Herb Rubin. What the agent provocateur handed the Nazi got a gun. As soon as he was about to shoot over Rubin, told him the cop arrested him and took him to jail.
Very interesting. I'm going to use a chapter from this book. This chapter is entitled, it's under Part 5, the continuing investigation. We're going to use today what's called Chapter 31, chronology. Now, this chronology of the King assassination, I think, from all the research that I've read on the King assassination through books, through magazine, newspaper articles, through videotapes, documentaries such as the one we just saw, which was featured Larry Fishburne. Larry, What's Love Got to Do with It? Fishburne as narrator. The documentary entitled Who Murdered Martin Luther King? I think it's key and critical that the title is significant because last week we showed another video, this one produced in England by BBC4 by the same title, Who Murdered Martin Luther King? And I contend that if you put the two together, you would throw this one almost in the garbage because the one that was produced by BBC4 was so much more revealing. This one did have key relevant information in it, but it also didn't say a lot of things. And also in this one, they told some very bold lies. And disinformation. And I think it's significant that they put this one out as disinformation under the same title of the one that was very good. I think that's very, very, very critical.
That's how they always do it.
Right. So let's go into chapter 31, chronology. And I'm basically going to read through this. Now, this is rather lengthy. If at any point anyone has anything that they would like to contribute or any questions or comments or clarifications, or if I mispronounce words, sometimes when you're going through this information, you mean to say A, and it accidentally comes out B or G, and you have to say A. So if anyone hears any of those kind of glaring inconsistencies, let's settle that, because I don't like sometimes I review these tapes back and I know in my mind exactly what I'm talking about, but I'll hear myself say something that is almost the exact opposite of what I intended to say. And we need to be real accurate. So we have from the book, Orders to Kill by William F. Pepper, published by Carroll and Graf Publishers, 1995, page 462, chronology. 1995 would have been Dr. King's 66th year. Now, nearly 18 years after I, the author, William Pepper, began this journey, I set out in chronological order the details of how and why I believe he was assassinated. As early as 1957, the FBI identified the Southern Christian Leadership Council, SCLC, as a potential target for communist infiltration. In 1962, the Bureau established a COM-IN file, which is Communist Intelligence File, on the organization and Dr. King. And in 1963, it increased its attention. A wide range of COINTELPRO activities was used in an effort to harass, discredit, and demoralize Dr. King. And again, everyone's familiar, COINTELPRO stands for Counterintelligence Program that was run by the FBI. Through 1964, the focus of the government's activity was aimed at discrediting and removing him from any position of prominence or leadership in the civil rights movement. By early 1965, however, they were no longer dealing with just a black Baptist preacher. For on December 10, 1964, Dr. King was a Nobel Peace Prize winner with international stature. The strategy became redirected toward his elimination. It is now clear that 2 attempts to kill Martin Luther King took place in 1965. There may have been others. The 20th Special Forces Group was present during the early stage of the Selma to Montgomery March, which began on March 21, 1965. One of the members of a sniper team in that unit, who the author here calls JD, briefly had Dr. King center mass before he turned away. And again, the term he uses, center mass, meaning when a sniper has you in the crosshairs of his scope, center mass is putting the bullet directly in the middle of the chest.
Locked on, fixed on.
Center mass means you're ready to pull the trigger and eliminate the target.
He has to get a command from his shoot team leader first, though, before he can pull the trigger.
Correct. The second attempt was in September 1965 when an effort was made to involve Louisville police officer Clifton Baird. It was only because Baird tape recorded and disclosed the actual approach which emanated from named Louisville police officers who were collaborating with the FBI agents from the Louisville field office that it became known. So then, key and critical, Dr. King, the assassination that delivered his death was, according to this author's research, the third assassination attempt that he was able to document. Electronic surveillance continued on Dr. King. In the fall of 1966, acting U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark refused to grant the Bureau permission to bug and wiretap Dr. King. However, J. Edgar Hoover had access to Army intelligence and ASA surveillance, which would be Army Security Agency, which had vastly more resources. In addition, the CIA's Office of Security was developing its own file. I think what's key in that paragraph, which we have to recognize that they may not be able to legally get a wiretap, the FBI may not be able to get it through legal channels or whatever, but they've got it overlapped. If the FBI isn't going to tap you, the military intelligence group will. If they're not going to tap you, the local police will. Or the CIA may be monitoring you if you've had contacts with anyone overseas, or in certain aspects, CIA just says, hey, we're going to run a domestic program, even though it is patently illegal. Or what is called the National Security Agency, which monitors global communications, has a information sharing system by which the NSA, National Security Agency, will spy for Great Britain in Great Britain. Great Britain will spy for America in America, and they'll exchange documentation. So legally, they're not disobeying the law.
Same thing is arranged in Australia, too.
Okay. It's the Alliance Blanc, which we've talked about sometimes. Basically, the White Alliance. Okay, from the beginning of 1967 until his assassination on April 4, 1968, King was subjected to a massive blanket of surveillance through the Army Military Intelligence Network and the Army Security Agency. The often daily reports were shared with FBI Director Hoover, who had also seconded a trusted agent, Patrick Putnam, to Yarborough, and this is Colonel Yarborough, who was head of the military intelligence. Let me just give you a brief little paragraph on him, so when we say his name, you'll know who he is. From a chapter called The Principal Players. U.S. government. Yarborough is Army Intelligence. Oops, where is he? Army Intelligence.
It came through Special Forces.
I'm sorry, they don't have him in this specific spot I'm looking. Here we go. Right, we have Major General William P. Yarborough. We're going to get into him in much more detail next week when we do a chapter called the Military Intelligence Group and the Black Clergy. So you will recognize his name after next week. He, at the time of the King assassination, was Assistant Chief of Staff for Intelligence in the U.S. Army. ASCI was his title, Assistant Chief of Staff for Intelligence.
By the way, military intelligence has been spying on black people since World War I.
Since 1917, and that's going to be the subject of next week's lecture. Okay, again. The often daily reports were shared with the FBI director, who had also seconded a trusted agent, Patrick Putnam, to Major General Yarborough's staff, and with CIA director and USIB, which is United States Intelligence Board Chairman, Richard Helms. Richard Helms, who later became CIA chief. Very key and significant. He was CIA chief during the assassination of he was CIA director at the time of King's assassination, but also the assassination of Patrice Lumumba. ASCI, which is, we just talked about, ASCI Chief Yarborough appeared to be the bridge not only between Hoover and Helms, but also between Army intelligence and each of the other national intelligence entities. And all of these national intelligence entities all had a member which sat on the USIB, United States Intelligence Board, which was chaired by Richard Helms.
Are you related to Jeffrey Helms?
They're all related, but I don't think so directly. From From early 1967, Dr. King tied civil rights, peace, and economic justice together. While H. Rap Brown, Stokely Carmichael, and others advocated a more violent response, they were seen as fringe figures with relatively small followings. Dr. King spoke to and bridged the poor and the middle classes, blacks, whites, and Hispanics, the young generally, and students in particular. His base was broad, and his credibility as a moral leader, despite the FBI's dirty tricks and smear campaigns, was unequaled. During this time, every record of every meeting involving government intelligence officials reflects the conclusion that he was the enemy, a dangerous revolutionary controlled by communists. At the top, against all reason, there were no doubts, no second thoughts, and only minimal dissent in the ranks. His anti-war speech in Los Angeles on February 25, 1968, which focused on the Vietnamese casualties, advocated teaching, preaching, and demonstrating. Yet the ACSI's counterintelligence analysis incredibly called it, quote, a call to armed aggression by Negroes against the American people, close quote.
You know what they're basing that assumption on, that he was a communist agent? He had contact with the ambassador in Washington from the Soviet Union. He was a friend. He used to have, like, every 3 months or 2 months, they would have dinner, and he would eat the Russian, he would lay out a Russian spread for him, and Martin Luther King was a big eater. And he would go there and eat that rich Russian food, and they would have conversations, drink wine, and get halfway slop. This is, I'm telling you the reports I read. And because of this, this is his only contact with any known communist, was this one ambassador in Washington, D.C. that on a regular basis he would have meetings with. And based on that, they said he was a direct communist dupe or agent or spy because of that one.
I think what has also been brought up was the relationship between Dr. King and Stanley Levison. Stanley Levison was a person of the Ashkenazi background, some would call them Jews, who was a top advisor to King, and many people think was perhaps the strategist who helped King. And Stanley Levison was believed to have had numerous contacts through his Ashkenazi, or some would say Jewish, affiliations. And in many people's minds at that time, Jewish and communists were almost synonymous.
What year was that, again, that meeting?
The meeting, I'm sorry, which meeting?
In Hawaii.
The lecture, his anti-war speech in February 25, 1968, which was it could have been 67.
I think it's 67.
Yes, you're right, 1967. His anti-war speech in LA on February 25, which focused on Vietnamese casualties, advocated teaching, preaching, and demonstrating. Yet, the military intelligence called it a call to armed aggression by Negroes against the American people. 4 hours later, the 111th Military Intelligence Group at Fort McPherson in Atlanta had 2 black agents ready to infiltrate the SCLC. Jim Harrison, the SCLC controller, had already become a deep cover FBI informant under the control of Special Agent Al Centinela. Other informants were run by Special Agent Art Murtaugh of the Atlanta Field Office. ASCI Yarborough, CIA Director Helms, and the FBI's Gay Edgar Hoover became increasingly alarmed as Dr. King increased the pressure on the administration during 1967, even considering running as a potential presidential candidate. They were forwarding a presidential candidacy of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King along with Dr. Benjamin Spock to run on an independent ticket to challenge Lyndon Johnson in the 1968 election.
Benjamin Spock, the one that wrote the baby book?
That's correct. Who at that time was regarded as a very significant anti-war figure and a very significant leading liberal cultural, social scientist or progressive.
He was called a progressive.
Correct. When in June, during the AMA National Convention in Chicago, Director Hoover met with fellow gambler, friend, and potential political ally Texas oil billionaire H.L. Hunt, whose daily syndicated Lifeline radio programs frequently attacked King, Hoover said he thought a final solution was necessary. Only that action would stop King. Other attempts to assassinate Dr. King originated during this period, apparently involving elements of organized crime for the first time. A meeting was held at the Blue Note Lounge in Jackson, Mississippi. Joe "Buck" Buchanan, a paraplegic involved in various Dixie Mafia criminal activities throughout the South, including New Orleans, offered a $50,000 murder contract. Present at the meeting were Tim Kirk and one of the Tiller brothers. The contract came out of New Orleans directly from Carlos Marcello and was eventually picked up by Red Nix of Tipton County, Tennessee, who was given a car and a gun to enable him to stalk and shoot Dr. King. In response to heightened tensions throughout the country, the 20th Special Forces Group was mobilized on June 12th with a unit being sent to Tampa. Warren, who is one of several individuals that the author gives a pseudonym to because these individuals are still living. In the book, the author tries to name individuals that were involved in the whole process that are now dead or who have come forward themselves to collaborate with the author has printed, but individuals who were involved that are still living. For liability purposes, obviously, the author has chosen to give them pseudonyms. And one of two of the gunmen of the sniper team that was there on the scene that were military detachment, he has named those two Warren and Murphy. So let me read this again. Warren, a sniper, was a member of one of the 20th Special Forces Group Alpha teams run by the 902nd Military Intelligence Group and sent to that city, which was Tampa, and sent to that city. The 902nd Military Intelligence Group was attached directly to the ACSI's office. Riots continued in Tampa from June 12th through June 16th, 1967. On June 15, Raul Pereira, P-E-R-E-I-R-A, Pereira, became a naturalized American citizen. Now this person, Raul Pereira, Pereira is a pseudonym here because this individual is still living. This is the mysterious Raul, which James Earl Ray so often has referred to as the man who was his handler and who most likely would have been his liaison between the CIA, the Mafia, and James Earl Ray. On June 16th, in the midst of the escalating turbulence, Merrill McCullough, a discharged black soldier, was brought back on active duty. Assigned to the 111th Military Intelligence Group, he was deployed to the Memphis Police Department to engage in undercover work. In July and August 1967, Gardner's aide of the 902nd Military Intelligence Group met with Eric S. Galt, an employee of U.S. defense contractor Union Carbide with top secret security clearance. Also, sometime in mid-July, James Earl Ray, who following his escape in April had worked his way to Montreal, somehow obtained and began to use the name Eric S. Galt as an alias. And again, James Earl Ray had been imprisoned on previous robbery charges, armed robbery, I believe it was. He escaped exactly 1 year before the assassination of Dr. King, and he ended up going to Montreal, where he said he became involved with this mysterious man, Raul, as in a gun-running operation. In 1967, Warren participated in the delivery of weapons to New Orleans. The equipment was stolen from his 20th Special Forces Group Camp Shelby training base, and the theft was organized by a master sergeant. The deliveries were made to Marcello's associate Zippy Cimento, and this is Carlos Marcello, who's a major New Orleans Mafia boss. The deliveries were made to Marcello's associate Zippy Cimento on property owned by the New Orleans Mafia leader. Army intelligence CIA operative Jack Youngblood was also present on occasion. During this time, Raul Pereira and his cousin Amaro were receiving some of these weapons at the port of Houston, which were shipped by water from New Orleans. Raul and Amaro also met during this time with Carlos Marcello in Houston. Riots broke out across the country that summer, with the most serious explosions taking place in Newark and Detroit, where Warren, the gunman, the sniper, was also deployed. Again, as part of Operation Garden Plot, Whenever riots would break out, Operation Garden Plot would go into effect. And what the author has documented here is that in every instance, the military intelligence group sent snipers to predetermined sniper posts in these cities. And they had gone out and recountered every major city across the country, set up weapons, supplies, set up contacts.
It's reconnoitered.
Reconnoitered. Okay.
It's reconnoitered.
Reconnoitered, which was a recon, they call that. So, despite contrary intelligence reports, Martin Luther King was branded as the source of the disruptions and being under the control of foreign communist elements. In response, Generals Yarborough from ACSI and Blakefield from U.S. Army Intelligence Command and CIA Director Helms pushed a new Domestic Special Operations Group, SOG, into high gear. Projects Chaos, which is operated by the CIA, and Merrimack, which was a mail-opening spy program, focused on spying upon dissenting citizens and infiltrating the 10 major peace and civil rights organizations, including NCNP, which was a National Council of I can't remember exactly what that meant for, but it was basically a collection of progressive and liberal organizations that it was like a political convention whose preparations for a national convention scheduled for the Labor Day weekend were well underway. In August, James Earl Ray, who was now using the alias Eric S. Galt, had meetings with Raoul in the Neptune Bar on West Commissioner Street in Montreal. He entered into discussions with Raoul, who said he would provide him with money and travel documents in exchange for James' assistance in certain smuggling activity. Desperate for money and a way to Europe, James agreed and finally left Montreal about the end of August to travel to Birmingham, where he was to meet up with Raoul. Raoul gave James a New Orleans telephone contact number. On August 31, Dr. King delivered a forceful keynote address opening the NCNP convention at the Palmer House in Chicago. A, quote, black caucus, which appeared to come out of nowhere, was formed, and arriving black delegates were forcibly brought under its control. The group, which appeared to be dominated by urban blacks, the provocateurs were later identified as Chicago Blackstone Ranger gang members and other inner-city thugs. The group was led by an unknown political cadre and immediately took on a disruptive policy. I received word of their intention to kidnap Dr. King and hold him until a range of their demands was met. King's exit was quickly organized immediately after he spoke. In retrospect, this was exactly what the provocateurs wanted. King was a bridge. He had the ability to bring people together. His presence was therefore contrary to the interests of the government provocateurs, who only wanted to break up the convention and defeat its purpose. They succeeded. On that day of August, the National Security Agency was formally brought into the recently formed Special Operations Group loop of the combined intelligence agency effort to counter the ever-growing anti-war economic justice forces. Following a meeting with Yarborough, the NSA launched Operation Minaret to monitor international cable traffic and assist the efforts of the ACSI counterintelligence section to identify foreign governments helping black radicals and anti-war groups. In September, Yarborough learned about the plans for a massive anti-war demonstration to be addressed by Dr. King on October 21 at the Pentagon. He began to prepare for the confrontation by increasing surveillance and developing a program of infiltration of anti-war groups. The government's worst fears were realized in the October 21 demonstration. The sight of masses of people attacking the citadel of American power not only appalled, but because of their impotence, humiliated the senior government and military officials who observed them. They believed that there was every possibility that what they viewed as a revolutionary force might not be consistently contained, particularly in light of the depletion of available trained forces in the continental U.S. due to the war. Secretary McNamara asked Chief of Staff Harold Johnson what he was going to do about the rising emergency. Johnson turned and asked the same question to his assistant chief staff for intelligence, Yarborough. The shock of the demonstration reverberated throughout official Washington, and at a senior level, the decision to form and use a specialized 20th Special Forces Alpha team was clearly made. On October 23, Gardner, following a request from the ACSI's office, received the roster of the 20th Special Forces Group and selected the 8-man Memphis team, which was to become Alpha 184. Meanwhile, in Birmingham, Raul gave James money to buy the Mustang and asked James, who was puzzled by the request, to buy some photographic equipment, which he ordered by mail from a Chicago company. Since Raul may have been involved in pornography in Houston, this could explain why he wanted the equipment, or it may have been simply to make it appear that James was involved in stalking activity. James was keeping in touch occasionally with Raul. Following his instructions, he went to Mexico, arriving on October 7th. He remained there until he went to Los Angeles on November 19. As he cleaned out his car before crossing the border, he discovered the LEAA business card with the name and address of Randy Rosenson written on it. As James made his way to California, units of the 20th Special Forces Group containing specialized sniper teams were deployed to recon cities that the Army contended might explode next spring and summer. The teams were ordered to make street maps, take aerial photos, establish communication networks, command posts, sniper sites, and operational plans. In August and early winter of 1967, some of the members of the 902nd Military Intelligence Group's Alpha 184 teams, and they probably should have called them Alpha 187 teams, were practicing daily for their mission at a site near Pocatello, Idaho. The shoot, in quotations, was from a triangular formation. And during these sessions, at least, though this seems to have ultimately changed, 3 shooters were practicing. Again, we talked about the triangular shooting, and this is how the special forces were set up to conduct these special termination operations.
And also, Alpha is a code word for 18.
18. The 18. The 18.
Alpha is a code word for 18.
Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, etc.
No, Special Forces have 18. They have 12 A-teams that come under a B team. Mm-hmm. And then 4 B teams come under 1 C team.
Oh, okay.
Which can take over, it's equivalent to a whole army.
Mm-hmm. A battalion would be yours?
No, an army.
Division.
An army.
Okay.
That's a whole army.
Now this would be all under Special Forces Group.
Yeah, see, each Special Forces team is capable of taking out and neutralizing a whole battalion. Each team.
Guy, have you ever had a Richard Marcinko?
No.
Road Warrior?
No.
Well, this guy, he's a white dude, big tall white dude, got a ponytail. He wrote 2, but World War I, World War II. He spent a year and a half in jail because the government wanted to test how good they can defend against somebody stealing away something. Him and about 5 other white boys broke into a naval base that stole a nuclear sub. Clear one arm type at it, tied up. They had it on tape, tied up. The sailors had them on their backs with no problem. And because he did it so good, they threw him in jail for a year, even though that's what they paid him to do. But he embarrassed the government so bad that their security is so off at these naval bases, they put him in jail for about a year and a half. He got 2 books. If you're looking like any soldier of fortune, you can find some of his books. It's called World War I and Richard Marcinko.
Okay.
I did something similar to that too at Fort Bragg in Barrison, 82nd Airborne Division. Okay? And they did something similar like that to me too.
Okay. Okay, getting back to our book, Orders to Kill. In autumn 1967, James' relationship and activities with Raul were on hold. Raul, however, knew how to contact him through LA General Delivery. Now again, at the time, James Earl Ray is in Los Angeles. Raul, however, knew how to contact him, and James had the New Orleans telephone contact number. In early December, James was instructed by Raul to travel to New Orleans. This he did, sharing the driving with Charlie Stein, a briefly known acquaintance. During that visit to New Orleans, James met with Raul. Raul told him he would be needed for another gun-running job in New Mexico, that he would contact him in a few months' time. On December 4th in Atlanta, as President Johnson was meeting with the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Martin Luther King announced the formation of SCLC's Poor People's Campaign, with demonstrations planned for Washington, D.C. in the spring. On January 10, an increasingly nervous president ordered Chief of Staff Harold Johnson to, quote, use every resource, close quote, under his command to defuse the anticipated spring civil disturbances. Around this time, another approach to the mob was made. A contract was offered to kill Dr. King. Previous efforts having been unsuccessful, minor gangster Myron Billett attended a meeting in the small town of Appalachian, New York, a favorite mob meeting place. Though most of the time was spent on other matters, 3 government agents from the CIA and FBI offered $1 million to Carlo Gambino and Sam Giancani to arrange for the killing of Dr. King. The offer was not accepted. The agents indicated that it would be placed elsewhere. Presumably, Marcello, whose operative Red Nix had failed to carry out the earlier contract, was approached, since he eventually came back into the frame and turned to members of his organization in Memphis to finally complete this contract. On February 12th, the day the Memphis sanitation workers went out on strike, the 111th Military Intelligence Group established a, quote, special security detachment, close quote, to be under the direct command of the ACSI, General Yarborough, for immediate deployment in emergencies. 10 days later, on February 22, an informant of the 111th Military Intelligence Group reportedly indicated that Martin Luther King would become involved in supporting the strikers. This was almost a month before he actually came to Memphis. 3 days later, a 20th Special Forces recon team entered Memphis, coming in through the Trailways bus terminal. One of their tasks was to map egress routes in the northern section of the city, meaning routes by which they would rapidly leave the city. On February 28th, Hoover's seconded FBI agent Patrick Putnam met with the 902nd Military Intelligence Group's Gardner and CIAB Director Colonel Van Tassel. Now again, this is a chronology, so these may be disconnected, but he's just having the events as they occurred according to his research as they occurred. On the weekend...
Can I add something?
Yes, sir.
Colonel Van Tassel, from 1966 through 68, was in charge of the Assassins Corps at Fort Bragg, North Carolina.
All right, Colonel Van Tassel.
They had a special area where they had these religious fanatics and these widows that would come to the NCO club, and they would drink 1 or 2 beers, they'd get up, they wouldn't talk to nobody. When they sat there in the NCO club, they had their Bibles open, and you could only get monosyllables out of it. Yes, no, maybe, yes, no. That's all. That's the only thing they would say. And they would sit there and slowly sip 1 beer for 2 or 3 hours, or 2 beers. Sometimes they drank 2 beers, and then they would get up. They would nod to each other. They all stand up at once, and they all leave.
Could have been they were maybe psychologically programmed.
You could never. I don't know anyone that ever had a conversation with them, but we knew they were part of the Assassins Corps, and they lived in a special area that had MPs patrolling. And you had special passes to get in there, and they had like 3 barracks, no, it was like 4 barracks and a little classroom or something there in the middle. And that was the Assassins Corps. Everyone, all the Special Forces guys, that was Assassins Corps area. And they would come out, go to movies, come out, go to the NCO club, and go back to that area.
Right, yeah, it sounds very interesting. On the weekend of March 15th, James Earl Ray was instructed by Raul to leave Los Angeles and drive to New Orleans, where he would receive further instructions. At this time, Memphis produce man Frank Liberto asked Lloyd Jowers, now Frank Liberto is also a minor mob official, asked Lloyd Jowers to repay a big favor. Jowers, who had been alerted earlier by another mutual acquaintance, was told by Liberto that the brush area behind his Jim's Grill was to be used as a sniper's lair for the assassination of Dr. King, who would at some time in the next 3 to 4 weeks be staying at the Lorraine Motel, which is directly opposite the brush area. A gun would be provided. Jowers was told that the police would not be there. A patsy was also going to be provided, and Jowers would be handsomely paid. Liberto explained that the money came out of New Orleans. Also, on that March 15th, Gay Edgar Hoover met one-on-one with the 902nd Military Intelligence Group's Gardner, who was the coordinator of the military mission. It is clear that by March 15th, not only had the die been cast, but various wheels had been put into motion so that the assassination would be carried out in Memphis during the course of Dr. King's visits to that city in support of the strikers. On the next day, Saturday, March 16th, the massacre of civilians began in the village of My Lai, Vietnam, and Senator Robert Kennedy announced his candidacy for the presidency on an anti-war platform. Dr. King addressed the powerful California Democratic State Council on that day, March 16, 1968, and on the following Sunday, March 17th, as ASA agents listened. He discussed on the telephone the arrangements for his travel from LA to Memphis, where he was scheduled to address a strikers rally on Monday evening, March 18th, at Mason Temple. Dr. King flew to Memphis and addressed nearly 15,000 people. 111th Military Intelligence Group agent Merrill McCullough was in the audience. King promised to return to lead the march, which was planned for March 22. He then went to the Lorraine Motel, where he met with local leaders, after which he went to the Rivermont Hotel, where the 4-man black detective team led by Jerry Williams provided security all night. During his stay, he was electronically surveyed, and the phones in his suite were tapped and monitored by Army Security Agency agents, with the assistance of Jim Smith, one of the Memphis Police Department's Special Services Intelligence Bureau. On March 22, the planned march to Memphis was canceled due to a heavy snowstorm and rescheduled for March 28. Also on March 22, James arrived in New Orleans a day late. Raoul had already gone to Birmingham with instructions for James to meet him there at the Starlight Lounge the next day. They met and at Raoul's insistence set out immediately for Atlanta. In Atlanta, Raoul told James to stay close to the rooming house because he might be needed quickly to go on a trip to Miami. He also asked James to leave the side door open so that he, Raoul, could come and go without being seen. In Birmingham, on March 22, 20th Special Forces Group Second in Command Major Bert E. Ride conducted a 2-hour briefing on the Memphis situation and plans. At the same time, President Johnson announced that General Westmoreland had been replaced by General Creighton Adams as commander of the Vietnam forces. At 7:30 a.m. on March 28 in Camp Shelby, 20th Special Forces Group Alpha 184 Team Captain Billy Eidson, E-I-D-S-O-N, was given his orders on the Memphis deployment. Later that day, the rescheduled march was broken up by provocateurs, and we just saw the videotape of the march in support of the strikers where they had the big signs that said, "I am a man," and how it broke up in a riot. But according to this author's research, it was agent provocateurs which started the riot there, which they blamed on a group of militant blacks called the Invaders that were there in Memphis. Again, later that day, the rescheduled march was broken up by provocateurs, and Dr. King was led to the Rivermont Hotel by a Memphis Police Department motorcycle officer, even though he had reservations at the Peabody Hotel. He was given his usual suite, making it possible, once again, for his activities and conversations to be monitored by the waiting ASA agents. And again, every time Dr. King stayed there, they put him in the same room, which was bugged by the same people. He was given his usual suite. The disruption of the march placed the Army on full alert status in Memphis. George C. Moore of the FBI's Division 5, which was counterintelligence, sent a Memphis field office report to Yarborough, and then late that afternoon, Moore went over to Falls Church, Virginia, to meet with Gardner of the 902nd Military Intelligence Group. The day after the aborted march, Dr. King tried to bring things together in a meeting with the Invaders, who he intended to believe, incorrectly, were responsible for the previous day's violence. The session at the Rivermont was overheard, and might have, just as a side note, this man Merrill McCullough, who worked with the MPD, which actually worked, he was from the 111th Military Intelligence Group. Maybe somebody can just escort sister as she's outside by herself.
I'm hungry, so I'm getting something out of the car.
Oh, okay.
You can just stand right
Yeah. Again, this sentence. The day after the aborted march, Dr. King tried to bring things together in a meeting with the invaders who he, oh, I meant to say, Merrill McCullough had been secreted inside the invaders. Met with the invaders who intended to believe were responsible for the previous day's violence. The session at the Rivermont was overheard and taped by ASA agents who cabled the transcripts to the Pentagon. They learned that Dr. King was personally determined to return to Memphis and complete his march on Friday, April 5. The same day, March 29, Raul, who James hadn't seen for over 5 days, returned and announced that the gun-running operation was set. He said they had to leave immediately for Birmingham. Once there, he instructed James to buy a rifle at the Aero Marine Supply Store. When James came back with a .243 caliber, Raul told him to arrange to exchange it for a .30-06, which James did the following day. Before departing, Raul instructed James to meet him on April 3 at the New Rebel Motel in Memphis and bring the gun with him. On March 29, even as Dr. King was addressing the problem of provoked violence in Memphis, various congressmen and senators delivered scathing attacks on him. The media picked up the theme. On that day, the FBI prepared a draft article for placement through, quote, cooperative sources, taking Dr. King to task for leading a violent march and also for staying at white-owned hotels. It urged him to stay at the, quote, fine Hotel Lorraine, close quote. The combination of the Bureau and the press, articles appeared across the country, was formidable. Subsequently, a decision to stay at the Lorraine was made, and to this date, we all know, we must make the assumption, if we don't know, that this relationship between the intelligence community and the U.S. press is still just like this. The press is an operational wing of the military, not military intelligence, of the National Security Council.
It's called propaganda.
It's called propaganda, but it's also called setting up these situations, because this wouldn't have been propaganda alone getting him to switch from white-owned hotels to, quote, the fine Hotel Lorraine, which was in the FBI memo. Around this time, Jowers, who Jowers again is the owner of the grill, which is called, what was it called? Jim's Grill, from which the shot emanated from behind the grill. Around this time, Jowers received a regular produce delivery from the Liberto-controlled M.E. Carter Produce Company, which contained in the bottom of the box the sum of $100,000 in cash, which had been delivered from New Orleans. Considering Jowers' role, this appears to be a lot of money and raises the possibility that Jowers may also have been dispersing funds under instructions to designated Memphis Police Department and possibly other officials. During this period, Jowers was visited on 2 occasions by Raul, who discussed details of the proposed hit with him. On March 31, while Martin Luther King preached at the Episcopal Cathedral in Washington, D.C., his aides Andrew Young, James Orange, and James Bevel flew to Memphis to begin preparations for the march. Their meeting that evening in the Lorraine with the invaders was overheard by ASA agents. At some point, the reservation for Dr. King's room was changed from a cloistered secure room 202 to a highly exposed one, 306. Now, the author tries to develop who would have possibly been the inside man in the SCLC that was responsible from getting Dr. King from a bottom level room to an exposed room facing the assassination post. And the author doesn't actually come out and name names. My suspicions have always been that Jesse Jackson was a key player as an inside man inside the SCLC.
Right.
They did name one individual who I believe the name was Jim Harrison, that they did name as being the controller of finances for the SCLC, who was a longtime FBI informant.
You're right. Jesse had a special It was just developed back in the 60s, but it looked like a pen. But it really was a transmitter receiver that gave out these beep, 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 beep. And it gave out a special beep, beep, beep that you can code it down the bottom, and it gives a signature beep. So they just pick it up on the oscilloscope, and they say, okay, there's Jesse, there's this other Agent X, there's Agent Y, and this is, they had 2 friendlies there on the scene, plus Jesse's oscilloscope beeper, okay, the A-team commander in one of his reports back to Fort Bragg says that shortly after he wasn't informed that Agent Jackson, that's all he called him, was Agent Jackson. There's a lot of Jacksons. That Agent Jackson was going to be on the scene. They said his oscilloscope locator went off, and he wasn't informed that Agent Jackson was beyond, and then Agent Jackson showed up, and he doesn't know how or why he showed up. But his oscilloscope, he was located by Agent Jackson by his oscilloscope identifier.
Very good.
Transmitter identifier.
On the morning of April 3, Dr. King arrived in Memphis, where he was met not only by the usual security team of black detectives, but by a specially formed group of white detectives. Well, excuse me. On the morning of April 3, Dr. King arrived in Memphis, where he was met not by the usual security team of black detectives, but by a specially formed group of white detectives who had never before been used as a security detail for Dr. King. Again, every time he was in Memphis, the same group of black detectives were his personal security, because Memphis Police Department said nothing's going to happen to him in our town. But on this particular trip, one day before his assassination, the black detective security team was not there. A group of white detectives were there, white detective security detail. They would be removed late that afternoon and were not formed the next day. Now, it was said that they were removed at the request of those with Dr. King, but that is actually absurd. How would the Memphis Police Department, which had attached the security detachments to Dr. King, how would they remove him at the request of some of the ones? They would just say, you know, basically, F you. You know, you're in our town, we run this town. That was the relationship that white leaderships had with blacks at that time. This was significant. The black detectives had been assigned to protect Dr. King on previous visits. Now, during a visit when the tension in the city and hostility toward him was at an all-time high, the special black security team was not formed. Shortly after Dr. King arrived at the motel, checking into room 306, PsyOps officers Reynolds and his partner Norton were met around noon, when the firemen on duty had begun their afternoon noon to 5 p.m. nap. By Fire Station 2, Fire Captain Carthiel Whedon, who provided them with an observation post on the flat roof on the east side of the fire station overlooking the Lorraine. There was a fire station directly across the way from there, and the special operations officers manned a observation post to observe Dr. King directly. Hourly surveillance reports on activities at the motel began to be transmitted to the 111th Military Intelligence Group agents stationed in the IEOC inside the MPD's central headquarters. Now, the IEOC would be an intelligence something operational command. There was a intelligence operational command post set up inside the Memphis Police Department, because they say they were anticipating massive civil disturbance in Memphis, and so they were wiring hourly surveillance reports on Dr. King's room from this observation post. Soon after the SCLC group arrived in Memphis that morning, one of their number, Controller Jim Harrison, who was the FBI informant, the deep cover FBI informant inside SCLC, called the Memphis Special Agent in Charge, Robert Jensen, in order to check in and tell him that he was in town and with the group in case he was needed for anything. Also on this day, in the back of the fire station, Memphis Police Department Intelligence Bureau officer Detective Ed Reddit and Patrolman Willie Richmond surveyed all activity going on at the motel. These were 2 black men. The TACT units were pulled back on the orders of Inspector Sam Evans, who controlled these units. Now again, TACT, these were units of this Memphis Police Department. These were like special reaction teams of 12 officers in 3 cars in Memphis. So when they would have some kind of disturbance, they would call out these TACT units, and this was TACT 10. TACT 10, which had used the Lorraine as its base, was ordered out of the immediate area of the Lorraine Motel. Its new base, beginning on April 4th, was to be the fire station. This pullback constituted a further removal of a security force from the immediate area of the Lorraine. On April 3, James, transporting the Aero Marine rifle, checked into the new Rebel Motel where he was joined by Raul late that evening. At that meeting, Raul told James to meet him at Jim's Grill at 3 p.m. the next afternoon and wrote the address down for him. Raul left, taking the rifle with him. Sometime around this time, a rifle connected with the assassination scenario may have been stored on the premises of a Liberto business located within blocks of the Lorraine. Martin Luther King, whose room was under constant eye-to-eye Memphis Police Department and 111th Military Intelligence Group surveillance, as well as electronic surveillance by Army Security Agency agents, Martin Luther King went that evening, April 3, to address an overflow crowd at Mason Temple in the presence of an 111th Military Intelligence Group team and 111th Military Intelligence Group and Memphis Police Department undercover agent Merrill McCullough. At the request of the Memphis Police Department, between 10 and 11 p.m. that evening, the only 2 black firemen at Station 2, Floyd Newsom and Norvell Wallace, were ordered not to report to their regular station that day, April 4th. Their new assignments were to fire stations in distant parts of the city. It appeared likely that Newsom and Wallace were removed because they were potential witnesses who could not be controlled. On April 4, Captain Eidson began briefing his Alpha 184 team at 4:30 a.m. at Camp Shelby. And the actual order to send them into place, we read that last week. The order has been reproduced in this book, and that is where the author got the name Order to Kill, which he says is an actual order given to these men at 4:30 a.m. to go to get into place and to get ready for the operation. I'm going to read that sentence again. On April 4, 1968, Captain Eidson began briefing his Alpha 184 team at 4:30 a.m. at Camp Shelby. They were shown target acquisition photos of the Lorraine Motel and their targets, Dr. King and Andrew Young, who were described during that briefing as enemies of the government. Young was a target as he was viewed as potentially the most effective successor of those likely to pick up the torch. No firing was to occur until the order was given by Eidson. Each member of the team was told where to go when they arrived in Memphis. They would be met and taken to their prearranged positions. Within 35 to 40 minutes, they were on their way. Shortly after, in Memphis, Lloyd Jowers got ready to open up Jim's Grill for the day and began to prepare, as usual, for the breakfast crowd. He told Bobby Smith not to follow her usual routine of taking breakfast upstairs to recuperating room house tenant Grace Walden. Presumably, this was because the area was to be used for some staging activity for the operation. At 10 a.m., even as the Alpha 184 team drew nearer to Memphis, ACSI Yarborough and U.S. Army Intelligence Commander Blakefield left the Pentagon for what was to be a nearly 4-hour meeting at Bailey's Crossroads with senior CIAB officers and others. At 2:10 p.m., the meeting broke up and they returned to the Pentagon. At the fire station, Reynolds and Norton climbed back up to their surveillance perch on the roof and continued the routine established the day before, passing reports along to the Memphis Police Department-based agents of the 111th Military Intelligence Group. The 111th MIG and ASA agents were also in place from early morning in the immediate area of the Lorraine. Also in position was the Memphis Police Department surveillance team of Reddit and Richmond in the rear of the fire station. Sometime in late morning, Jowers was visited by Raul, who gave him a rifle to hold, saying he would pick it up later. Jowers dutifully put it on the shelf under his counter. Dr. King got up late that morning. There was an SCLC executive staff meeting set for the afternoon, and a court hearing on the city's application to enjoin the march was scheduled for that morning. Andrew Young had been assigned the task of attending the hearing and reporting back. Sometime after he left, Memphis Police Department Chief McDonald took up a position near the Butler Street entrance to the Lorraine, walkie-talkie in hand. In Memphis, Captain Billy Idson introduced Warren and Murphy to Lieutenant Eli Arkin of the Memphis Police Department Intelligence Bureau. Again, Captain Billy Idson commanded the assassination, the sniper teams. Warren and Murphy were on one of the two Alpha 184 sniper teams. Lieutenant Eli Arkin, who headed the Memphis Police Department Intelligence Bureau. Arkin reportedly told them that their assistance was essential to save the city that Dr. King's forces were preparing to burn down. They then met up with their contact about 1 p.m. Warren named him and said he believed he was a CIA agent. They were taken to their perch on top of the Illinois Central Railroad building, where they assumed a state of readiness. Again, these were snipers. And this building overlooked the Lorraine Motel. In the course of the afternoon, Captain Idson put Warren on the radio with Memphis Police Department Inspector Sam Evans, who described the layout of the Lorraine. He also advised them that, quote, friendlies would not be wearing ties, close quote. The only government agent we have identified who was physically close to Dr. King at the time of the killing was Merrill McCullough, who was not wearing a tie. It is also interesting to note that James was wearing a tie, although Raul reportedly was not. Inspector Evans, whose son Sam Jr. is currently an investigator for Attorney General Pierotti's office, was a significant Memphis Police Department senior officer and a link between the Army and civilian operations. Jowers had been told by Liberto that no police would be around at the time of the killing. Evans was in charge of Memphis Police Department Special Services, including the emergency TACT units. And on April 3rd, he ordered the TACT units in and around the area of the Lorraine Motel to pull back. The closest unit, TACT 10, moved its base from the Lorraine to the fire station, thus providing the civilian shooter with more of an opportunity to escape. Also, Evans' introduction to Warren by the Alpha Team's commanding officer, Captain Billy Idson, clearly placed him in the loop regarding the Army operation. Around this time, J.D. and his partner were met by their contact officer and taken to their perch on the Taylor Paper Company water tower. So at this point, you have three sniper teams in place. One behind Jim's Grill, directly in front of the Lorraine Motel. One on top of the, what was this building? The Illinois Central Railroad building, which has been identified by two of the men who contributed to this work, Warren and Murphy. Those are pseudonyms. And you have a third team, which is J.D. The name is not being given because he's still living, and his partner, who are on the Taylor Paper Company water tower. We have a triangular setup. James, having run some errands earlier that morning, made his way downtown to look for Jim's Grill, where he was to meet Raul in mid-afternoon. On the way, he stopped to change a slowly leaking tire, which made him late. James arrived on South Main Street after going to the wrong bar, eventually entering Jim's Grill. Not seeing Raul inside, he retrieved his car and finally parked it in front of Jim's Grill around 3:30 p.m. By that time, Raul had shown up in the grill. He instructed James to rent a room in the rooming house upstairs, which he did under the name of John Willard, although Raul had initially wanted James to rent the room using the Galt alias. Again, this Galt, Eric S. Galt was a contract employee of Union Carbide who had a top secret government clearance, CIA clearance. James was dressed in a dark suit with a white shirt and tie and looked out of place. Raul was also wearing a dark suit and light shirt, but was not wearing a tie. Lloyd Jowers pretty much followed his routine most of the day, except for meeting with Raul and spending time out in the back brush area behind Jim's Grill. Raul sent James to purchase binoculars and then instructed him to bring his bag upstairs to the room. James also carried a bedspread up to the room in case he had to sleep there, since he didn't want to sleep on the one provided. By this time, all of the preparations for James to be set up were completed. He had rented the room, which was to be the staging area, brought some of his physical possessions into it so that they were available to be planted, and had purchased a set of binoculars which could be used to support the allegation that he was surveying the motel. Around 4 p.m., Andrew Young returned from court and joined the SCLC meeting in room 306. Between 3 and 4 p.m., Memphis Police Department Intelligence Bureau Lieutenant E.H. Arkin met with Philip R. Manuel, who is a former Army counterintelligence officer and investigator for the United States Senate Committee on Permanent Investigations. Manuel had been in Memphis for a couple of days. Sometime after 4:30 p.m., Arkin appeared at Fire Station Number 2 and ordered Reddit, the black Memphis Police Department detective, had ordered Reddit to go with him to Central Police Headquarters. Between 5 p.m. and 5:30, at a headquarters conference room filled with military brass, the Director of Police and Fire, Frank Holloman, who Frank Holloman is a former FBI officer, ordered Reddit, the black detective, to go home for his own protection, indicating that there had been a threat on his life. Reddit resisted, but was finally driven home by Arkin, who had already learned that the threat was bogus. Around 4:40 to 4:45 p.m., a man in a dark blue windbreaker drove up South Main Street in a white Mustang with Arkansas plates and parked it just south of Knipes, in front of the billboards and just south of the parking lot driveway. Knipes was right next to Jim's Grill. He sat in the car for some time and then eventually got out and entered the rooming house, going up to room 5B, where he would join Raul. This white Mustang driver was clearly not James, who was dressed in a suit and tie that day. Sometime late that afternoon, Raul visited Jowers again in the grill. This time he picked up the rifle he had left earlier. He carried it into the back of the grill and apparently upstairs to James's room. At about 5 p.m., James Latch answered the phone in the LL&L office and handed it to Frank Liberto. An agitated Liberto yelled at the party on the other end of the phone, quote, "I told you not to call me here. Shoot the son of a bitch when he comes on the balcony," end of quote. He then told the caller that he should collect his money from his, Liberto's, brother in New Orleans after he had finished the job. The sum mentioned was $5,000. It appears that Liberto was speaking to the shooter, who may have been Raul. Meanwhile, also around 5 p.m. or shortly afterward, Invader, Big John Smith, and again, Invaders were the group of black militants that were there at the Lorraine Motel, staying in rooms that were being paid for by the SCLC, while Dr. King tried to work out a relationship with them. Meanwhile, around 5 p.m. or shortly afterward, Invader Big John Smith arrived at the Lorraine Motel. Passing through the lobby on his way to a meeting room, he noticed a number of Memphis Police Department officers around the motel, particularly Officer Carol Harris. When he came down from the meeting about 30 minutes later, 5:30 or 5:45 p.m., the officers, including Harris, had all disappeared. By this time, then, all security had been stripped away from Dr. King's immediate area. In contrast, military surveillance units were in place. 3 rooms at the Lorraine, including Dr. King's room 306, were bugged and the telephones tapped. Eye-to-eye physical surveillance was in place from units on Butler and Hewling Streets, and photographic surveillance was in process from the roof of the fire station. Also still in place were the Alpha 184 sniper teams. Sometime around 5:15 p.m., Raul gave James $200 and told him to go to the movies, as he wanted to meet alone with a gun runner. $200 to go to the movies. Raul also told James to leave the car, as he would be using it later. Instructed to return in 2 or 3 hours, James left the rooming house around 5:20, got a quick bite to eat, and then remembered the flat spare tire. Deciding to try to have it repaired, he went looking for a gas station. He drove north on South Main for 2 blocks and then at Vance Avenue turned right at about 5:50 or 5:55, directly in front of 2 Jim's Grill's customers, Ray Hendricks and William Reed, who were walking to their hotel, the Clark's Hotel. Between 5:30 and 5:50, with James out of the way, the shooter was in the brush area with the murder weapon, where he was joined by Lloyd Jowers. The two began to watch the motel, waiting for Dr. King to come outside. Meanwhile, another person waiting in room 5B prepared to take the, and this is 5B of the Jim's Grill upstairs, prepared to take the bundle containing the rifle James bought, and other items of his downstairs to plant them. Also at 5:50 p.m., as Gay Edgar Hoover was settling in at his favorite Washington eating and drinking place, Harvey's Restaurant, probably Harvey's Gay Restaurant, ACSI Yarborough was en route to attend a reception for the Chinese ambassador at 3225 Woodley Road Northwest in D.C. Back in Memphis, around 5:45 to 5:50 p.m., Reddit's surveillance partner Richmond observed the hurried departure of the invaders from their motel room 315 and 316. Some left in Charles Cabbage's car and others departed on foot. Soon after they left, Richmond observed Reverend Billy Kyles knock on the door of room 306. He saw Dr. King answer the door, speak briefly with Kyles, and then go back inside, closing the door behind him. Right around then, the 111th Military Intelligence Group undercover agent Merrill McCullough drove into the parking lot of the Lorraine with SCLC's Jim Orange and Jim Bevel. Now, a couple things in that paragraph. The invaders were staying on the same floor with Dr. King, just a few doors down. The invaders were militant young black brothers who were trying to work with the SCLC. They were staying in rooms being paid for by the SCLC. It was someone who 15 minutes before the shot was to be fired told them to evacuate those rooms, that the SCLC would not be paying for them. To this date, it appears that that someone was Jesse Jackson. Also, Reverend Billy Kyles, who we saw being interviewed in this kind of bogus Who Killed Martin Luther King. Reverend Billy Kyles being interviewed. Reverend Billy Kyles was the one who was inviting Dr. King to his house to have dinner. Reverend Billy Kyles also, who's been shown to have lied, saying that he was in meetings with Dr. King all that day, when those in the meetings with Dr. King said that no, Billy Kyles was lying, he was not in those meetings. Billy Kyles was the one who knocked on the door I'm sorry.
You want to buy some of those tapes that you advertised? Can you come here and get them?
You can get them. You can also call me on the hotline.
I called you because I was going to try to buy some today,
but you didn't leave a message.
I did.
No, you didn't.
Yes, I did.
Okay, must not have been my hotline. I check it all day, every day, and I didn't get any message from you. It's the 403 number?
Yeah. Okay,
try it again. If I miss your message, I apologize, but I want to get your message.
But I'm saying, is this open, or can you come here and buy some of those tapes?
You're not, unless you'll be able to find me. Okay?
What you gonna buy?
No, I was talking like the Easy tape.
Okay, yeah, that's an excellent tape. I don't have it with me today, I don't believe.
VCR, you don't have it on cassette.
I can put it on cassette, yeah, for you. You just call me on the hotline. All right, my brother, greetings. Again, let me, one other point. Reverend Billy Kyles, who keeps being interviewed post, but Billy Kyles, like Jesse Jackson, who's extensively interviewed in this, had some real questionable activities going on that day. And it was he who, soon after the invaders left, Richmond, who was surveying the scene, observed Reverend Billy Kyles knock on the door of room 306. He saw Dr. King answer the door, speak briefly with Kyles, and then go back inside. Close the door behind him. Right around then, the 111th Military Intelligence Group undercover agent Merrill McCullough drove into the parking lot of the Lorraine with SCLC's Jim Orange and Jim Bevel. And again, just a last note, Reverend Billy Kyles is the one who himself said, as soon as I walked away from Dr. King, the shot was fired.
He's the one without the title.
I'm sorry?
He's the one that didn't have the title.
It does not say. It does say that Merrill McCullough, who was their boy, did not have a tie on. It doesn't say anything about Reverend Billy Kyles.
They had one agent that was supposed to pull him outside. Was Billy Kyles that agent?
Billy Kyles was the one who got him outside. He was to go to Billy Kyles' house for dinner that evening.
Okay, because they were waiting for him. The special forces
Correct.
reports state that they were waiting for him to come out after he went in there. He never showed again. Okay, and so they had to call up they called Fort Bragg, because they, you know, they instant tell, they called Fort Bragg. Fort Bragg then called Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. then called back to Memphis, and they sent Memphis, between the link, they sent an agent to pull. They said, do not shoot our agent. We are sending an agent to pull him outside. Okay? And this is what the Special Forces secret crypto account said.
Well, we do know that one of their agents on the scene who was arriving right at this time was Merrill McCullough. But, as I say, Reverend Billy Kyle's behavior in this book and in his language on these videotapes, these two documentaries that we've shown now in this series, I think that Reverend Billy Kyle's behavior is very questionable. I'm going to start reading quickly because I can see we have about another 25, 30 minutes on the tape, and we do want to get to some questions. Shortly afterwards, the SCLC staff meeting broke up. Reverend Kyles was on the balcony some 15 to 20 feet north of Dr. King's room. The exiting staff members left Dr. King's room quickly and headed for their rooms to freshen up in preparation for the soul food dinner planned at Reverend Kyle's home. A minute or two before 6 p.m., Dr. King came out on the balcony, leaned on the railing, and began to talk to the people in the group. Right below him in the parking lot, one of whom was Randy Young. Betty Spates had entered the grill just before 6 p.m., coming across the street from the Seabrook Wallpaper Company looking for Jowers. She made her way into the kitchen. Betty Spates is a young black woman who was having a sexual relationship with the white man who owned this grill. She made her way back into the kitchen, noting that the kitchen door, which was always open or at least ajar, was closed. Jowers was nowhere to be seen. As Dr. King stood on the railing at 6 p.m., he was center mass in J.D.'s sights. J.D. waited for the order to fire. At the same time, Andrew Young, who was standing in the motel parking lot, was also held center mass in Warren's sights. Unknown to either Army sniper, the civilian shooter was also drawing a bead on Dr. King from the bush area, with Lloyd Jowers kneeling nearby. At exactly 6:01, the shooter fired, and his bullet struck Martin Luther King in the side of his face. The impact rocked him back, and then he fell where he had been standing. As the impact rocked Dr. King backward and he began to fall, Reynolds, who was on top of the fire department, snapped 4 or 5 shots, catching Dr. King as he fell. Norton, who was with Reynolds, then swung his camera from the direction of the parking lot of the Lorraine to the left, focusing on the brush area to catch the shooter lowering his rifle and leaving the scene. After dropping the gun on the ground, the shooter scrambled through the brush and down the wall. Jumping down onto Mulberry Street, he ran north to Hewling and went around the front of a waiting Memphis Police Department car to get into it on the passenger side. The car then quickly drove away, heading north on Mulberry Street. Paul, the yellow cab driver of car number 58, who was picking up a fare at the Lorraine Motel, saw the shooter coming over the wall and into the police car and immediately reported it to his dispatcher over his radio. Meanwhile, Lloyd Jowers had picked up the murder weapon which had been left on the ground by the shooter and began to run back to the rear door of his kitchen. Inside, Betty Spates, hearing a shot and seeing the back door open, went to it and looked out. Jowers was then about 10 to 15 feet away, coming toward her. She stepped back and he ran into the building. He was white as a ghost, out of breath, and his hair was in disarray. The knees of his trousers were muddy. In the kitchen, he turned to her and said plaintively, quote, "You wouldn't ever do anything to hurt me, would you?" She replied, "You know I wouldn't, Lloyd," close quote. In front of her, he quickly broke down the gun into 2 or 3 pieces and covered it with a cloth. Again, this is a young black woman. He left the kitchen, stepping quickly behind the counter, under which he placed the gun on a shelf, pushing it back out of sight. Immediately after the shot, 111th Military Intelligence Agent Merrill McCullough raced up the stairs to reach the fallen Dr. King and knelt over him, apparently checking him for life signs. A couple key points, and his picture of Merrill McCullough leaning over the body of Dr. King is here reprinted in the book, along as with a famous picture of the people pointing up on the balcony, which they attempted to reproduce in this latest documentary, but they inaccurately had Merrill McCullough pointing up also. Everyone else is pointing up, but Merrill McCullough is the only one who's leaning over Dr. King. Now, Merrill McCullough, who was supposed to be one of the militant blacks, the invaders, somehow is, at this point, functioning as a first aid treatment or whatever. But Merrill McCullough, who I'm convinced was there to assure those who still had the group in their beads, to assure them that Dr. King was fatally, more mortally wounded, or was not going to be conducting the activities that were planned for the coming weeks. And another point that's not listed in this paragraph, the exact moment after the shooting, another woman who was leaving her job at 6 p.m. was driving by the entrance to the parking lot, and she said she saw Jesse Jackson at the foot of the stairs leaning down and putting something into a garment bag while on the scene. We did talk about that last week. So immediately after the shot, Merrill McCullough raced up the stairs to reach the fallen Dr. King, and knelt over him, apparently checking him for life signs. There's no evidence that Jesse Jackson was there immediately on the scene, but Jesse Jackson in this documentary is talking about how great he was and how close he was, and in their reconstruction of it, they have their Jesse Jackson up on the balcony immediately over Dr. King. But in this photograph and any other photographs, you're not going to see Jesse Jackson there. Jesse Jackson, who walked around for the next 2 days with a bloody shirt on, later had to admit that he put the blood on the shirt himself.
That's right. For what?
For what? To make himself seem like he was so close to Dr. King that he cradled his head at the man was shooting.
That's what he told, that's what he said when he, for the first 2 or 3 weeks after the thing, until one of the ministers around him told Jesse to shut up. And they said they were going to kick his butt if he didn't shut up. They argued, and there was a big scene about the ministers around him, Abernathy and all those other guys arguing with Jesse, saying, told him to stop telling that lie. But for about 3 weeks, he went around and told that lie.
Right. Okay. Oops, shoot, I missed my page here. Okay. Okay, here we are. Okay. Very close to the time of the shot, a person dressed in a dark suit exited James's room 5B, went down the stairs and out of the building, and dropped the bundle in the recessed doorway of Knipe's store. He then got into the Mustang just south of Knipe's and drove away, going north on South Main Street. In the 5 minutes immediately following the shooting, TTH plus 6, Warren, I don't know what, TTH, the shooting plus 6, I guess this is the timing of it, Warren and Murphy on the Illinois Central Railroad building, and J.D. and his partner on the water tower were ordered by Captain Billy Eidson to disengage and proceed to their respective pre-assigned egress routes. Sometime thereafter, Reynolds and Norton made their descent from the roof of the fire station. MPD officers Joe Hodges, Torrance Landers, and Carol Dunn, having penetrated the thick brush at the rear of the rooming house, found what appeared to be a fresh set of large footprints. One was 13½ inches long and the other nearly 14 inches. They were at the top of the alley, which ran behind the buildings and pointed in the direction of the door at the end, which led to the basement and also into the grill. No proper search was conducted of the basement of the rooming house. Dr. King was rushed to St. Joseph's Hospital. James, returning to the rooming house area, saw a policeman blocking traffic on South Main Street. And just as an aside here, it said Dr. King was rushed to St. Joseph's Hospital. In this documentary, you had Jesse Jackson claiming that he went to the top of the stairs and saw immediately that Dr. King was dead. I've had, and it might have been in this book, other information that said Dr. King was slurring and his jaw was moving as if he could have been maybe having some muscular reaction or trying to get his body to work. But when the bullet hit Dr. King, the bullet entered his jaw, severed or penetrated his spinal cord in several places, and the bullet went through and actually lodged just under the skin, barely under the skin, inside of his left shoulder blade. They actually have an autopsy photograph of Dr. King in here, and you can see the bullet, which is completely intact at this point, laying. You can see a lump under his skin, and that's the actual bullet having entered his jaw and ended up just under his skin in his back.
The question is whether a shot like that would be fatal. I mean, doesn't sound like it pierced anything.
It severed his spinal cord in several places.
Okay.
It would have been immediately fatal. Dr. King was rushed to St. Joseph's Hospital. James, returning to the rooming house area, saw a policeman blocking traffic on South Main Street. Constantly aware of his fugitive status, again, this was exactly 1 year after he escaped from prison, he headed south out of the area intending to call his New Orleans contact number in order to learn what had happened. When he heard on the radio that Dr. King had been shot and that the police were looking for a white man in a white Mustang, he decided to head straight for Atlanta. Inexplicably, no all-points bulletin and no signal Y, which would have blocked exit routes from the city, were issued by the Memphis Police Department. Within half an hour after the killing, a hoax CB broadcast took place depicting a car chase on an outward egress route in the northern end of the city. Remember that the Alpha 184 recon team had on February 25 mapped egress routes in that section of the city. Yellow cab driver Paul dropped his Lorraine fare off at the airport and reported what he had seen, first to another yellow cab driver, Louis Ward, and then to 3 Memphis Police Department officers. He was subsequently also interviewed that evening by the police at the yellow cab offices on South 2nd Street. Paul reportedly died late on the night of April 4th, either falling or being pushed out of a car on the Memphis-Arkansas bridge. So you can see the first murder in the cleanup process occurred on the same day. But a man who said he actually saw the shooter coming down out of the bushes reported it to several of his fellow employees, to 3 Memphis Police Department officers, and then later interviewed by the Memphis Police Department, and then died that very same night, either falling or being pushed out of a car while on the Memphis-Arkansas bridge. Very interesting.
How do you fall out of a car on the Memphis-Arkansas bridge?
Probably doing something that you normally wouldn't be doing while driving across a bridge.
Thank you.
On the evening of April 4th, H.L. Hunt was called by J. or Gay Edgar Hoover and advised to pull off the air an anti-King Lifeline radio program, to pull off all anti-King Lifeline radio programs being aired in the next 24 hours. Hunt immediately summoned John Currington to his home and gave him the assignment of organizing a group of secretaries to make the radio station calls, to call off this nationally syndicated broadcast. Hunt began feverishly working on an anti-King book on the day after the assassination, only to abruptly abandon the project. In the course of the rest of the evening, Dr. King was pronounced dead at St. Joseph's, despite what Jesse Jackson pronouncing him dead immediately after shooting, and his friends paid their last respects. In performing the autopsy, the coroner would strangely fail to trace the path of the bullet in Dr. King's body. The death slug was removed in one piece from Dr. King's back, where it came to rest just under his left shoulder blade. Memphis Police Department officers, often accompanied by FBI agents, began to take statements from witnesses in the area, and the rifle, death slug, and items found in the bundle in front of Knipes were sent off to the FBI laboratory for forensic examination. Again, this murder was under the jurisdiction of Memphis Police Department, under the jurisdiction of the state of Memphis, and of course under the county. So for the FBI to come in immediately and take jurisdiction over it, to take key evidence away from Memphis and to take them to the FBI laboratory, was an obvious violation of not only protocol, but violation of state laws. The same thing, exact same thing occurred in Dallas with the murder of John F. Kennedy. Very early the next morning, in response to a request from the Memphis Police Department, Memphis Public Works Deputy Director Maynard Stiles assigned 2 supervisory workers, Dutch Goodman and Willie Crawford. Remember, non-supervisory workers were on strike. So the rest of these guys were on strike, but these supervisory workers were ordered very early the next morning to go to the rear of the rooming house, where under Memphis Police Department supervision, they cut the brush to the ground. The tall hedge, which ran between the fire station and the parking area immediately adjoining the rooming house, was also cut to the ground. A large tree branch between the bathroom window and the Lorraine may also have been cut down sometime after the killing, thus eliminating an apparent obstacle to a clear shot from the bathroom window. So we have this shot is supposed to come through from the bathroom window, but there was a large tree limb. In fact, there's a photograph in here taken immediately after the shooting, which shows the brushes that were cut down the morning after the assassination still there, but it also shows this large tree limb that's fallen down over the area. The Memphis Police Department investigation was aborted almost from the onset, taken over and controlled by the FBI, even though the murder was a state and not a federal crime. Though detectives conducted numerous interviews, glaringly obvious leads and significant witnesses were ignored, and the drunkenness of the state's main witness, Charles Stevens, was concealed. The investigation files were also clearly sanitized. Where, for example, are the interviews conducted of yellow cab driver Paul, the one who died the same night, falling out of a car? The interviews of yellow cab driver Paul, the photographs of the bullet removed from Dr. King's body, these were sanitized. The photographs of the scene of the crime as it was at the time, before the bushes at the back of the rooming house and the hedge between the parking lot and the fire station had been cut down. Lloyd Jowers opened the grill the next morning after the shooting after driving Bobby to work. On the way, he told her about finding a gun out back, which he said had been turned over to the police. Sometime in late morning, he lifted the lid of a box and showed yellow cab driver James McCraw the rifle he had hidden under his counter within a minute or two immediately after the shooting. A scope was also in the box, but it was not attached to the rifle. Jowers told McCraw that this was the rifle which had been used to kill Dr. King, and that he had found it out back and was going to turn it over to police. It seems that Jowers was already beginning to construct a cover story. I'm just going to read one more section here. Obviously, it is too much of a coincidence for the Alpha 184 Army snipers and the civilian assassin to have been there independently taking aim at Dr. King at the same moment. The whole arrangement, the manipulation of Martin Luther King into the exposed balcony room, the stripping away of security and potential witnesses who could not be controlled, the provision of a patsy, the provision of massive surveillance and a sniper team, the provision of local intelligence and logistical assistance, the restriction of the investigation by FBI control, the ignoring of leads and evidence begging for attention, the alteration of the scene of the crime could only have been possible with the knowledge and cooperation of the FBI, Army Intelligence, the Army's Security Agency, the 20th Special Forces Group, elements of the ACSI's office, the CIA, the mob, and senior officers of the Memphis Police Department. Further, we know from Warren's orders that the White House, the Secretary of Defense, the FBI, and officials of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, among others, were aware of the Memphis Army deployment. The relationship between the Army and the civilian assassination operations is further revealed by James' use of the alias of Eric S. Galt. Galt, holding top secret clearance, was at the time involved in another covert operation, Project Mexpo, with the same unit, the 902nd Military Intelligence Group, which carried out the Memphis deployment and coordinated the 111th Military Intelligence Group, Army Security Agency, and 20th Special Forces on site. In fact, Gardner of the 902nd Military Intelligence Group himself selected the 8-man Alpha 184 sniper team. It clearly appears that the hit was to be carried out by the civilian contract killer with the Army snipers there as backup shooters if the contract shooter could not make the shot or if he failed to kill Dr. King. How two snipers shooting from different locations could take out both King and Young and still pin the shooting on James Earl Ray is difficult to reconcile until one remembers that the initial plan appeared to be to shoot at a moving target in a car. This is what they had practiced in Pocatello, Idaho. Because of the movement of the car and the fact that bullets would be deflected back and forth inside, it would be virtually impossible to determine the origin of the shots. Again, with Kennedy, you have the man being shot in the front of the head, and still to this date they're saying a magic bullet came from behind, the magic bullet passed through his neck, went down, stopped, waited a second, at 1.6 seconds, changed corners again, then went through 4 or 5 went through Connolly's body here, went through his body one other time, went through his wrist, shattering the bone, went through his leg, and then ended up laying fully intact, weighing more than its components which were left behind, fully intact on the stretcher, which happened to be, not Connolly was on the stretcher, was in a corridor of the hotel, of the hospital. Absurd what they do, but they planned on the same scenario with bullets from two different angles on King. The Army snipers were surprised.
And they had three. They had the civilian shooter.
Correct.
And two Army shoot teams.
Correct.
Okay,
And triangular.
That's triangular.
Correct.
That's not two.
That's correct. The Army snipers, of course, the Army snipers did not know, apparently, they said they did not know about the civilian team.
That's possible.
But they had practiced a triangular shooting, and they had detached thinking this was not a triangular, but two. Pieces fit in the puzzle when we have this historical hindsight. The Army snipers were surprised that their targets, Dr. King and Andrew Young, were outside of their rooms in exposed positions just before 6 p.m. Not believing their luck, they quickly got them in their sights and waited for the order to fire. They were amazed when this did not come. So, it goes on and on. The book is phenomenal. The book is 510 pages long. I highly recommend you want to get it. We read last week The Order to Kill, but since we're on record on a videotape, I'm going to again read this Order to Kill, which makes up the name of the book. Now, and perhaps brother who's with me today, who has an extensive military background, can help me with some of this cryptography that they use, or some of this symbology that they utilize, these operational code terms that we are able to decode sometimes, and sometimes we have a hard time. This memo appears at the top. It says JCS 004/30/R2. That JCS obviously means Joint Chiefs of Staff. 004 would probably refer to this particular memo, the code number on the memo. 00430 could perhaps be relating to the date. No, it wouldn't be, because this killing happened on 4/4 and not 4/30. So we have EWT. The next line, CORUEPJS. Next line, and these are all, this is obviously some kind of communications line or some kind of naming what this is or what the program.
The routing procedure.
The routing procedure, that's what I mean. Very good, thank you. Next line, DE space RUEDPSA, and then there's a number 65809. We have next line, ZNY space CCC. Now we have a date. 0 space 301442Z, April 1968. 2, next line, 2 RUEOEIA/Sin-Car Strike. Now, Sin-Car Strike, we're getting into this Commander-in-Chief CAR strike. Now, what would CAR?
That's the code name of that particular operation.
Operation.
You see, there's an overall name, like a strategic name,
Which would be Sink Strike.
and then there's a tactical operational name that that the people inside, everyone will say these names, and they don't know what the names refer to.
Okay, right.
Tactical name and a strategic name.
Okay, so this is to this group, and it's from LANTCOM, Sync Special Ops. So LANTCOM, that would be some kind of command, right? Or LANTCOM, LANTCOMN, so that would be command communications, or what would that be? Okay. Okay, next line, info/JCS, so info from Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Information. Info means information.
Information from Joint Chiefs of Staff. Next line, RUCIAUA/MAC, Military Army Command /Military Army Command. I don't know what the first part of this. Next line, REUPJS/NMCC, and that's National Military Command Control Center, or Command Center, National Military Command Center.
That's in Langley.
Langley, correct. Next line, BT. Next line, top secret, crypto 6880. Now that would be top secret. Crypto 6880 is obviously how this message would have been cryptically sent.
No, see the top secret, see they have like confidential, then they have secret, then they have top secret, and the highest level is crypto.
Okay.
Okay?
So top secret crypto 6880.
And that's the specific number that refers to that message.
Okay.
Each message will have next to the top secret crypto, it will have a number, and that goes in the file. You know, it's just a, whatever number pops up, you know, that number goes in the file so they can recall it later.
Okay. Subject, Lantcom Sync Strike. And we talked about Sync Strike, Commander-in-Chief Strike. Sync Strike was the overall program. All right, I'll give you the exact definition that the author uses in this book because it's concise and it's accurate. Sync Strike. Ooh, where's the glossary? Bear with me one second. Okay, I'm not finding it so easily, so let me just off the top of my head. Sync Strike was a commander-in-chief of a operational group strike force, which was oh, here I have it. Sync Strike, Commander-in-Chief U.S. Strike Command. And that was the program that was directed at the suppression of black terrorists. And that was the Army's program.
See, Sync Strike is not only is directed against any designated terrorist any place in the world.
Okay.
You're dealing with special forces units, and between the special forces and the Navy SEALs, their operational thing is all around the world. So you could be in Africa, or you could be behind the Iron Curtain, or you could be in Russia, or in South America, or on the Caribbean, or any place.
So Sync Strike would have been an operational force directed.
Right.
Okay, under Operation Garden, or OPPLAN, O-P-L-A-N, Operational Plan, Garden Plot, 3375. Again, Garden Plot was the suppression of black uprisings. Every time a riot occurred, Garden Plot went into effect.
And that was updated in Rex to Rex 84.
Of course, Garden Plot was also pulled out in 1992. So, Operation Garden Plot, Washington. References: A, Lantcom 5673, comma, DTD. So, references: A, Lantcom 5673, DTD. B, Sync Strike Garden, which would have been Sync Strike Garden Plot. Now, 1, mission, recon, riot site, Memphis, prior to King, comma, Martin L. arrival. So this was regarding the reconnaissance or reconnoiter, what do you call it?
Reconnaissance.
Reconnaissance of the Martin Luther King site, which they had previously done all this. They had previously reconnaissed, set up the sniper posts, the egress routes, etc. Part number 2, concept of operatoin. It appears it should say operation, and this is Army misspelling. CAS support at NAS Riverside. Now I don't know what CAS support is, but NAS was Naval Air Station Riverside, and when the egress route was used, the egress route that these particular snipers, Warren and Murphy, who are quoted in the book, used, they went to a riverside, and then a naval station, a Navy boat from the Naval Air Station picked them up and took them downriver to raiding cars. So it appears that this CAS support at NAS Riverside meant that they were going to be getting some kind of operational support from the Naval Air Station, Riverside. Next sentence, no, comma, repeat, no authorization beyond brief at 0430 unless commanded. So again, they were to get in position and wait for the briefing at 0430 before they were to actually go and do the assassination. So they put themselves in position, and we talked earlier about the briefing that occurred at 0430, which was 4:30 a.m. And then the next sentence, chopped available on notice channel 012. So that appears to be, the author says that there were helicopters awaiting in case they needed some kind of rapid evacuation, and that would be available on notice channel 012, which would have been a communications channel. Part number 3, situation. Deployment, main force must have local intelligence. Well, of course, we talked about the local intelligence that they got the support from Lieutenant Eli Arkin of the Memphis Police Department Intelligence Office. Part number 4, out, not SZNR23, period. I don't know what that out would mean, the end of this communique, not SZNR23. I don't understand that. Will advise if changed. And then lastly, they said info is being sent out to CJCS. 1 copy went. That would have been the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. 3 copies went to DJS, would have been the Department of Justice, probably Gay Edgar Hoover.
No, he wasn't head of the Department of Justice. That would be the district attorney.
Okay, let me get this clear because
Department of Justice would be the Attorney General of the United States. The Attorney General, Hoover technically comes under the Attorney General. And if it says Department of Justice, they're talking about the Attorney General.
And I don't think that is correct because there was one place, I remember reading this, at one place they talk about who these different players are, DJS, and it was Defense something. It wasn't Department of Justice. But it could have been Department of Justice. It does say so in the book, and I highly recommend everyone get the book, but I'm not going to dwell on that because we're running out of time. We have SAC, SA, 3 copies. That would have been the special agent and in charge of security affairs. That would have been FBI. 3 copies went to them. Special agent in charge of security affairs. You have 1 copy went to NMCC, which was the National Military Command Center in Langley, Virginia. We have 7 copies go to SECDEF, which would have been the Secretary of Defense. We have 9 copies going to ASDISA. That would have been ASDISA. ISA stands for Internal Security Affairs. ASD, I don't understand exactly who that would be. ASDISA, 9 copies went. 4 copies go to the W House.
The whorehouse.
The whorehouse, where Lyndon Johnson was the top pimp at the time. And of course, we also must recognize and put this on videotape, we talked about this before, 5 days before the assassination of Martin Luther King, a very significant event took place when Lyndon Johnson had his very famous television live where he told everybody that he would end the bombing of North Vietnam and that he would not accept or would not seek the nomination of his party to be president. That was 5 days before the assassination of Dr. King. And it says, file 1 copy. And then the memo is closed out. So that is, according to the author's research, the actual order to kill Dr. King that was sent out the day of the assassination. We have about 3 minutes left on the tape. Again, we're at the African Culture and Research Center in Long Beach, which is located at 1901 Atlantic Boulevard in Long Beach, California. The phone number here, for those who are interested, is area code 310-599-1492. This is our Monday evening session we call Africans in Search of Truth. This is our research group, and we're in the midst of a 4-part series which is entitled the 4-part series really is dealing with the official U.S. program for the suppression of black people. The first part we talked about the overall, what we're going to be discussing in the series. Next week we're going to be dealing with military intelligence group and the black clergy, specifically focusing, slow down my tongue, on the Memphis Commercial Appeal Report, which appeared in the Memphis Commercial Appeal in, I believe it was February 1993. And a very key story written by Stephen Tompkins, and that details how the military intelligence group surveyed 3 generations of Dr. King's family, but also set up a system by which they would manipulate and control the black community and spy on the black community using the black clergy. And there are many of us that believe that this spy network and spy control system still operates to this day.
Boulay.
The Boule, the black clergy, the Boule are also mentioned in the course of that discussion. Steve Coakley does a very, very good thing. The last part of our series on December 4, we're going to deal with America's official anti-black agenda then and now. So if there are any questions or comments, we have a few more minutes on the videotape. Yes, my brother.
I think that, like I was at Fort Bragg when all this took place, and I had access to the top secret crypto because the 3 white NCOs I kept and supplied in 30-year-old scotch. And so, and that's, and plus they liked me and everything, and and 2 of them were feeling sad about JFK being knocked off by the military. And they said, oh, they're doing it again. And, you know, and so they would, for 30 days prior, I was aware that he was going to get knocked off, and I followed the reports. And this is the most accurate, in 30 years, the most accurate portrayal of it that I have heard, based upon the military reports that I read at the time.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you. I don't have as much inside connection. I've never served in the military. But, you know, as a researcher of and a chronicler of the published information on different things, you know, you hear all of these different conspiracy stories and things, and I'm a believer in conspiracies, no matter how much they poo-poo you for even saying that conspiracy theories, this and that. I'm a believer in these conspiracies, but you must also compile the maximum amount of information, cross-reference them, and throw out those things which don't seemingly fit or seem off the wall. And of all of the things that I've read on the assassination of Martin Luther King, this really has been the most impressive book. And the book not only details the assassination of Dr. King, but it does such a good job of putting the whole context of what America really was involved in, because you had this protectionist cadre of basically old white men who had all the power, and they're seeing that the social changes are going to be undermining their control and their ability to manipulate people in the way they were. And one of the key areas that they saw with this whole civil rights thing was going to bring them off their high horse. And so hence they used the whole terror that they held over us of the communist threat, and they combined that with the threat of black people in America aspiring for their natural rights and for economic and political and social justice. And of course they use that in their sick minds to justify actions such as what was done on Dr. King. Any other questions or comments? Anybody want to contact me? You're going to hear this on the video. I'm the Conscious Rasta. Reach me at area code 310-403-2921. That's the Conscious Rasta hotline. You can get this videotape if you're seeing this from someone else's copy, or we have over 35 other videotapes, very hard-hitting. We also have 30 or more published research reports. So I highly recommend getting in contact. Come on out and see us Monday evening, 6:30 p.m. right here at the African Culture and Research Center. Until the next time, I'm going to sign off the videotape. Maybe we'll continue our conversation here a little bit. Our loot to continue where the struggle continues, but never, ever, ever lose sight that victory is certain.